I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's June 22nd, and we have a lot to talk about. June is Pride Month, and to acknowledge Pride Month, the National MS Society released a statement that I think is worth sharing. So I'm going to read directly from the MS Society's statement. The National Multiple Sclerosis Society is a movement by and for every person affected by MS. People cannot live their best lives if they are not honored and included, and there's still more work to do to make that value a true reality. In honor of Pride Month, the National MS Society announces the steps it is taking to better serve the LGBTQ+ community affected by MS. Everyone deserves the health care they need without discrimination or bias, and a provider that knows and supports them. That is why the Society includes the LGBTQ+ community on our advocacy work and will work to recruit more diverse MS healthcare providers and encourage cultural competency training to foster a better understanding of the unique challenges of living with MS in the LGBTQ+ community. Interacting with the Society should feel safe and affirming for people of all gender identities. So improvements are being made to the way information is collected from people and encouraging staff to include pronouns in their email signatures. Everyone should be able to see themselves and know they belong in the MS movement. The Society will continue to focus on diverse representation of all people affected by MS, including the LGBTQ+ community, in everything it does. The Society is a global leader in MS research. To further solutions for everyone living with MS, it is leading the way in the MS research community to explore the questions that need answering about the LGBTQ+ community living with MS. The Society has put together a short survey for members of the LGBTQ+ community affected by MS, so it can prioritize work based on the needs shared. Take the survey at ntlms.org/LGBTQ survey. If you need support now, MS Navigators have specialized resources for the LGBTQ+ community. Call 1-800-344-4867. That's the entire statement, and I'll be including a link to that survey in today's show notes. And later in today's episode, I'll be joined by Matoaka Kipp, a young woman who's living with MS, and the story of Matoaka's MS journey is one that I think you'll want to hear. But before we get to my conversation with Matoaka Kipp, there are a few other things that you should know about. This past week, the U.S. Supreme Court tossed out the lawsuit that threatened to end the Affordable Care Act, more popularly known as Obamacare, thereby preserving access to health care for the 1 million people living with MS in the United States, along with the 31 million Americans who are directly covered by the Affordable Care Act, and the 59 million Americans who are living with other pre-existing conditions. The National MS Society joined the American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, and more than a dozen other patient advocacy organizations in releasing this statement. This ruling is a victory for people with serious illnesses such as cancer, heart disease, stroke, lung disease, diabetes, neurological conditions, mental illness, and anyone suffering long-term effects from COVID-19. These patients and millions more rely on the law's critical patient protections to obtain more affordable, comprehensive health coverage. This decision ensures that essential patient protections will remain in place, including those prohibiting insurance companies from denying coverage or charging more for coverage to people with pre-existing conditions, requiring health plans to offer essential benefits needed to prevent and treat serious conditions, and eliminating arbitrary dollar limits on coverage. Federal tax credits that make health insurance affordable for millions of Americans will continue. The 39 states that depend on federal funding to help provide critical Medicaid coverage to low-income adults will also have funds to continue to offer increased access to that safety net coverage. Millions of Americans benefit from these fundamental protections. Today's ruling leaves in place the healthcare law's critical access to quality health coverage for more Americans. On behalf of the millions of patients our organizations represent, we stand ready to assist lawmakers in efforts to strengthen the law and ensure all patients can access the quality care they need. And that's the entire statement. When this lawsuit was originally taken up by the Supreme Court, the National MS Society joined 33 other patient advocacy organizations in filing a friend of the court brief, arguing that the lawsuit was without merit and that the protections provided by the Affordable Care Act needed to be maintained and protected. It's worth noting that while the Supreme Court protected the Affordable Care Act, for the third time I might add, the court did so without actually ruling on the merits of the plaintiff's argument. Instead, the justices pointed out in a 7-2 opinion that the states and individuals bringing the lawsuit had no standing. That is, they couldn't file a lawsuit because they hadn't been harmed by the Affordable Care Act, and the first thing that must be determined before anyone sues anyone else for any reason is whether harm has been done. Without harm, there is no lawsuit. So the good news is that the Affordable Care Act remains in effect, and there might even be some interest in Congress in getting around to fixing some of its admitted flaws and improving the coverage that it guarantees. We'll keep you posted. Jean-Martin Charcot was born in Paris in 1825, and he's considered by many to be the father of modern neurology. In 1868, Professor Charcot made the very first diagnosis of MS, and his clinical pathological definition of multiple sclerosis is still used today. Since 1969, the Charcot Award has acknowledged Professor Charcot's pioneering work by recognizing the lifetime achievement in outstanding research into the understanding or treatment of MS. Once every 2 years, the MS International Federation announces the recipient of the Charcot Award. And the recipient of this year's Charcot Award is Professor Alan Thompson, the Dean of the Faculty of Brain Sciences at University College London, Pro-Vice Provost for London at University College London, the Garfield Weston Professor of Clinical Neurology and Neurorehabilitation at the UCL Queen Square Institute of Neurology, and among many other responsibilities, Professor Thompson has been the chair of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, where it's been both my honor and privilege to know and work with him. During his 40-year career, Professor Thompson has had a tremendous impact on many areas of MS research and clinical care. He's led, served on, and founded numerous national and international scientific and funding boards and committees. He's served as a mentor to several noted MS specialists. And he's been a strong advocate for including and amplifying the voice of people affected by MS on a global scale. If you've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, it's very likely that your neurologist relied on the diagnostic standard called the Mcdonald Criteria in making your diagnosis. Well, Professor Thompson has been a key contributor to the Mcdonald Diagnostic Criteria Committee since its formation in 2001, and he co-chaired the recent international committee which updated the diagnostic criteria for MS in 2018. The Charcot Award will be presented to Professor Thompson at the largest MS research conference in the world, the European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis, or ECTRIMS meeting, scheduled to take place in October. And between now and then, I'm looking forward to cajoling Professor Thompson into joining me on the podcast. He is one of the difference makers that you should have the opportunity to get to know. If you had a chance to listen to last week's episode of Real Talk MS, you might remember that I talked about anxiety and depression in MS with my guest, Professor Anthony Feinstein. And when I introduced Professor Feinstein, I mentioned that he was leading a series of studies looking at how cannabis might affect cognition in people living with MS. Well, this past week, Professor Feinstein and his research team published results from their study. Now, the study enrolled 40 cognitively impaired adults with MS who were long-standing, frequent cannabis users. 20 of the study participants were taken off of cannabis, and 20 continued using it. Both groups were followed for 28 days, and each study participant's cognitive skills were tested before and after that 28-day study period with a battery of cognitive testing that measured information processing speed, working memory, learning, and attention. And at the end of 28 days, the people who had been taken off cannabis showed significant improvement in processing speed, learning, verbal and visual memory, and executive function. People in the group that had continued using cannabis showed no changes in cognitive function between the start of the study and the end of the study. And among the study participants who were using cannabis to manage their depression, the participants who stopped using cannabis actually experienced less depression, while those study participants who continued using cannabis showed no change in their level of depression. But what was most striking about the outcome of this study is that among the group that had stopped using cannabis and demonstrated significant cognitive improvement, there was no awareness among the members of this group that they had, in fact, improved. The research team concluded, and I'm quoting now, "When people with MS who have been using cannabis on a daily basis over many years discontinue the drug and remain abstinent for at least 28 days, significant cognitive improvement occurs across multiple domains, such as processing speed, learning, verbal and visual memory, and executive function." That's the end of the quote. But again, the people experiencing this improvement were not aware of it. Again, quoting from the research team, "In short, there is a failure of self-awareness, thereby compromising metacognition and leading to decisions related to persistent cannabis use that are self-injurious. This potentially opens a door to assisting people with MS gain more awareness of how cannabis can harm their cognition. If successfully applied, such an approach has the potential to better inform an individual's decision when it comes to weighing the pros and cons of using the drug." That's the end of the quote. Since somewhere between half and 2/3 of the people living with MS have used or are using cannabis, this is important information that everyone will want to factor into their own decision-making. Just last week on the podcast, I said that beliefs were more important than facts when it comes to making decisions. Well, these are the facts. This is the evidence. Embrace it or ignore it at your own risk. And if you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. And speaking of clinical research, I know a lot of Real Talk MS listeners are from the United Kingdom. And if you're in the UK and you use a wheelchair for mobility, there's an opportunity for you to be a part of MS research. A research team at the University of Birmingham is exploring what matters most to people who have MS and mobility challenges when they're assessed, prescribed, and fitted with a wheelchair. Study participants will be involved in a 1-hour interview and then spend approximately 30 minutes answering questions in response to a story. Now, there hasn't been much work in this area, and if you live in the UK and use a wheelchair for mobility, you can make your voice count. If you'd like to learn more about this study, You'll find a link in today's show notes. I have some very good news to share with you today. For the past 20 years, a nonprofit organization called First Descents has offered free outdoor activities, community building, and skills development to young adults who are living with cancer, providing individualized care, medical attention, and the opportunity to connect with other young adult oncology patients. First Descents has offered week-long local and international adventures that feature activities like rock climbing, whitewater kayaking, and surfing. And all of these adventures are offered to the participants at no cost. I first told you about First Descents back in 2018 when they launched their first outdoor adventure program for young adults living with MS. And in 2019, Brad Ludden, the founder of First Descents, joined me on the podcast. And we talked about how First Descents was expanding its outdoor adventure programs for young adults with MS. So you may be wondering, what's the good news? Well, the good news is that First Descents just received $1 million from Velocity Global, an international employment services company, and that $1 million is going to support the further expansion of free outdoor adventure programs for young adults who are living with MS. This means that many more young adults with MS will be able to experience these amazing outdoor adventures. These are the kinds of experiences that create new friends and lifelong memories. If you'd like to learn more about First Descents programs for young adults impacted by MS, you'll find a link in today's show notes. Receiving an MS diagnosis can be frightening. Receiving that diagnosis as a young adult can feel like your whole world just got flipped upside down. And receiving that MS diagnosis as a young adult who's also forced to confront other systemic issues and obstacles presented by our healthcare system. Well, that's exactly what my guest, Matoaka Kipp, has faced. In a moment, we'll meet Matoaka and hear about her MS journey. My guest today is Matoaka Kipp. Matoaka lives with MS, and I think she has an interesting and timely story to share. Welcome to the podcast, Matoaka.
Thanks so much, John. Great to be here.
Tell me about how your MS journey began. When were you diagnosed, and what was going on in your life at the time?
Yeah, I would love to share. So where do I start? I was diagnosed in 2016. I was 21, and I was in my first semester of graduate school. I was at the University of Michigan, and I was, a student who was in between jobs and classes and trying to have a social life, and also living in a new part of the country. I'm originally from New England, and I don't know how long I noticed symptoms, but I know for sure that there were a few moments in grad school where I thought to myself, there's no way that everybody else is this tired. And I think that, going from undergraduate to graduate, I was just in this like regular mill of being so exhausted all the time. And it was something that was really normal. And so when I thought about, being tired all the time and having headaches, and even sometimes noticing tingly feelings in my feet and my hands, I really did not think much about it. And so anyways, long story short, I eventually went and saw a doctor at the school I was at, and they checked me out, and I saw 3 different doctors, and each one said, "I think this is stress." And I said, okay. So I left and went on with my finals. I was just trying to get through. And it was around mid-November. And at one point, I noticed the left side of my body just went numb. And I lost vision. And so at that moment, I was like, okay, if this isn't a stroke, I don't know what it is, but I need to go to the emergency room. So I had a friend drive me, and I arrived. Of course, I can't remember it all, but what I do remember is within 24 hours, there was a a doctor or a resident in my room and an MRI later, and they said, "You have MS." And, I really didn't know what that was. I was alone. I was confused. I had never gone through the MRI process before. And suddenly there was just this like new chapter in my life that had just truly arrived. And so I was a little stubborn, but many appointments later, I decided to take 2 semesters off of school. I couldn't drive, I couldn't work. And so you can imagine I was at that time really, really holding on to this newfound independence, which given an MS diagnosis, I felt like I had lost completely. So I moved back in with my mom, and really I was just home for 3 to 4 months before I started on my first treatment.
During that time when you were at home, where did your thoughts go?
Yeah, I think my biggest fears came to light during that moment. I thought, I'm never going to graduate. I'm never going to get my master's degree. I'm never going to, have my own apartment with a roommate and be independent. And I think at that time, that was my biggest fear. Now that doesn't seem as scary as it did. But at that moment, I was in shock. I didn't know anyone else in my life who was experiencing something similar. I'd known friends who, I don't know, maybe were diagnosed with different things over the years, but nothing that was a chronic condition that would be forever. And so really during that time, I poured into artwork, and that's where I started making. A simple way to say it is I began making greeting cards because I really couldn't do much more than draw. And my whole family are artists. So I have been surrounded by art my whole life, but it was a really helpful way to, at the time I didn't know this, but looking back, it definitely held me together.
So you were self-treating with art therapy, whether you knew it or not, huh?
I suppose so. I never took a class about art therapy in social work school, so I guess I just did it as an extracurricular outside of school.
So you started doing these greeting cards. They grew into a side business for you. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's definitely a source of great joy for me. The company, I call it my small biz, is called Habibi Mail, and Habibi is the Arabic word for beloved. And my Situ, my grandmother, is Lebanese, and so she calls me Habibi. And so this, the name was an ode to her, and just represents sharing love and affirmation and gratitude through a good old-fashioned snail mail. And I felt like, in getting an MS diagnosis, all I wanted to do was speed up, but I had to slow down. And I think that card writing is such a slow process that it kind of, I don't know, it just happened at the perfect time in that way. And so I started this small company using Instagram, and I don't know, had like 100 followers. And ever since then, I've been slowly growing it. It has a social justice focus and displays messages and designs that are authentic to me that I couldn't find in a store. So some examples of that is I have a card set, 4 cards that they're called a Spoonie theme, and they all are about what it's like living with a chronic illness. So it'll say things like disabled and fabulous, or I love when we do nothing, and things like that I truly feel. And it's been amazing to connect with other people online about those messages.
So how can we find your greeting cards?
Yes. So I do have a website. It is in its baby phases, but you can find me on Instagram at Habibi Mail. And I believe if you Google that and just put website next to it, you'll also be able to find me.
Well, we'll be sure to include some links in today's show notes to make it really easy. I can imagine more than a few of our listeners would love to have cards that say disabled but fabulous. And I think that is fabulous. So here we are, I guess, about half a dozen years following your diagnosis. You're doing well now?
I am doing well. It's always such a hard question to answer because I always want to say yes. I'm sure many people would say this, that every day is different, MS or not. But some days I forget I have MS, and some days it's all I can think about. I think fatigue is my biggest opponent these days. But more and more, as I have lived with this disease longer, I have accepted it as more of a part of me. And when I can't think of the right word, or when I can't remember something, or I recognize a lot of cognitive shifts in myself throughout the past 6 years, I have become more okay with it, but it's still hard.
I'm sure, fatigue is one of those, to me, it's a really tricky symptom and a very unfair one. First, it can get in the way of being out in the world and fully engaging in your own life. At the same time, it's invisible. So it's a symptom that can really stop you on days or at moments, and yet it's one that other people never see. And so to use an overused hack phrase, gee, you look fine, right? But those kinds of statements hurt in multi-dimensional ways, in my opinion. So I can appreciate how trying to manage fatigue is tricky and hopefully less tricky as science gets better at figuring it out. If I can switch gears a little bit, there's a serious nationwide conversation about healthcare equity that's taking place all across our country right now. And I guess more precisely, that conversation is about addressing the inequities in our healthcare system that pose unfair obstacles and unrelated challenges to members of underserved, underrepresented, or overlooked communities. You identify as queer. So as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, have you seen how your healthcare has been affected? Your access to care, quality of care, maybe your treatment? Have any of these things been impacted because you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community?
I so appreciate the way that you asked that question. Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is such a big conversation because there are so many overlapping identities that we all hold, but that I hold. And people face all sorts. I think, starting at my very first memories of accessing a healthcare professional, I really as a queer kid, as a gay kid, I never got a proper sex education ever. And so that I would even just start there and saying that I remember asking my doctor, I was probably, somewhere in my youth, and he didn't have an answer for me, really could not tell me what safety looked like. And so I think from an early age, I had not only distrust of the medical system, but I wasn't getting support there. And so I guess, before I had MS, and I'm really just thinking about this, I really never saw a doctor. Now I'm at the doctors all the time. I'm at the neurologist all the time. I'm getting blood work done all the time. It is a habit, but that was not a choice that I wanted to make. And so just some things that are coming up to me as I grew older and as I was experiencing what it was like to be in the healthcare system, also having MS. I think that my biggest discomfort in any healthcare setting is that I identify as cisgender, but my gender is always assumed. The gender and the sexual orientation of my partner is always assumed. And it can become incredibly tiring when a healthcare professional, is trying to build a relationship with you, a connection, and be supportive, and says, do you have a boyfriend? And that question, I don't have a boyfriend, but that question is so limiting. And even, how's mom and dad? Just this vision of what a family system should look like is so subtle in those conversations. Even, talking about my siblings are queer and thinking about, when people ask me, how are your brothers and sisters? I I have to pause and I have a moment of, do I use this moment to educate someone when I am receiving care? Or do I smile and move forward? And depending on the moment, I might choose to do either. I think that as a cis person, as a white person, I have always been taken very seriously by the medical system, by healthcare professionals. And so as I'm speaking, yes, those are my experiences. And I do experience moments of extreme harm and discomfort around being queer. But I'm also thinking a lot about how those experiences are exacerbated for people who are trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and people of color, especially Black and Indigenous folks in the healthcare system. So yeah, that's a long answer to a hard question.
It needs to be a long answer, and I appreciate the answer that you've shared with us. As you were speaking, a question popped into my head I want to ask you about. You were talking about conversations you've had with a healthcare provider, the do you have a boyfriend kind of thing, right? Has it ever happened where that conversation you're having and it's about, well, who do you have that is part of your support system, when they realize that you have a same-sex partner, does the conversation ever just stop?
Yeah. And I laugh because it's just so uncomfortable. It does. And I think that, as a queer person and someone living with MS, there is just like phenomena that happens, and that I have, and I'm sure there are others experiences like this, but I have experience coming out in so many different ways. Coming out as queer, coming out as living with a disability, those are both oftentimes when people or healthcare professionals see me, those are not assumptions that they make that I'm a part of those groups or those communities. And so, the word exhausting comes to mind. The conversation does sometimes just stop. And I think that in the moment it's annoying. At some points it can even be emotional, but I think that over time it like really inhibits the connection and the trust that could be built in a really vulnerable moment. And
it's my greatest hope that conversations like the ones we're having will help bring those kind of conversations to an end. So thank you for doing your part in helping to make that happen. When you think about the inequities in our healthcare system and you see them through the lens of your own experience, what do you think has to change, and how does it change?
Yeah. Well, I think something I've been learning a lot about recently, I've been reading the work of prison abolitionist Miriam Kaba, and she talks about how really there are no single solutions to such complex problems. And I think that has been helpful for me in thinking about healthcare inequities, because they're so interlocking and complex and historical and ingrained in us. But I think my biggest hope is that as people who are receiving care, that we can become partners in care rather than patients. I want to be the expert of my appointment, my treatment, my diagnosis, and I want to feel like I have agency in my own body. And that's not something I definitely have had some really amazing healthcare folks in my life, but I know that is not always an experience that people have. And so that's my first answer. And my second answer is I also want to be celebrated in a really beautiful and authentic way. So I think, before, and of course everyone has their own wants and needs, but before I was diagnosed, I really didn't use the word disabled at all as an ally at that time. Without a disability, I really stuck to people first language, saying, people living with MS or people with disabilities. And now as someone who, identifies as disabled, I have, like many others, reclaimed that word in a similar way to which people have reclaimed the word queer from a slur to one of pride and connection. And so I think I know language is so powerful, and I want to be able to define the words that my healthcare professionals use to talk about me, and I want to be able to have the language that's in the forms I fill out, and I want the language to be representative of my experience, and not the deficit or the illness or the negative parts that can feel so consuming, if that makes sense.
When we're talking about cultural or societal inequities, they don't necessarily stop under the heading of healthcare. It's a much more pervasive kind of a complex situation. I want to mention that you happen to work at the National MS Society. So I'm hoping you can tell us what your job is all about and how you ended up at the society.
Yeah, I've been at the society for almost 2 years now, which I really wasn't. I wasn't looking for a role at the MS Society. I knew about the society because when I was first diagnosed, it's the first Google result that came up. I even knew about this podcast when I was first diagnosed. So it's not hard to find. A friend just sent the job to me and I was like, I want to do this. And I think the reason was because I wanted people with MS and people impacted by MS to be leading the work for people with MS. And that felt so incredibly important to me. And if I could be a part of that, I was trying to find my own way. I really, as a younger person with MS, I didn't have a community of folks. I didn't really understand what was going on. And I didn't really get to talk about MS unless it was to my doctor. So I was yearning for that and sought the MS Society to find it.
As you mentioned, wanting to have people with MS or people affected by MS leading the work, it occurred to me, I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday who said, I think people would be surprised if they knew how many folks at the National MS Society have MS or have been affected by MS, perhaps a family member, loved one, someone they knew very well, etc. And so their conclusion was what they see is not only compassion, but passion for the goal, passion for the work, because it's in some ways personalized, internalized, a part of that person's story. And speaking of personalizing the work, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, what's your experience been like working at the National MS Society?
Yeah. I think that the beginning of, I'll first speak about the employee resource groups that are new to our work within the last year. They are led by some truly incredible people. One is called Inclusive Voices, specifically for people of color, and then there is an allies subgroup of that. And then the other is Society Pride, which is specifically for queer people or LGBTQ plus folks, and then an allies subgroup. And so those spaces have been beautiful homes of activism, of learning, of connection that was really missing for me when I first started. I was looking for community, but in a way that I guess on the ERGs, you're connecting with people who you'd never meet in person. It's all virtual, which is a funny thing, but I really saw it as the intersection of all the things that I cared about and all the things that I identified with. So, we're talking about queer people living with MS. We're talking about Black and Latinx people living with MS. Those are just examples of some of the focuses. And that just that clicked for me and was something that I continue to be really drawn to. And I think the reason why is because disabled people or people living with disabilities have truly been at the heart of all forms of activism and all movements. the phrase "nothing about us without us" from the 1990s comes from disability rights, and I have great pride to be connected to that. And then for queer folks, the phrase "silence equals death" comes from activism during the 80s and during the AIDS epidemic and the leadership of Black trans women. And I think that I feel all of those connections in those spaces.
Well, Matoaka Kipp, thank you for all that you do every day through your work at the Society to help improve the lives of everyone affected by MS. And thanks for sharing your story with me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, John.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/199. You'll find that link in today's show notes so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or text. I hope you'll join me next week for the 200th episode of Real Talk MS. I've been looking forward to that milestone for a while now, and it just won't be a party without you. So please plan on joining me next week for episode 200 of Real Talk MS. I'm John Strun. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.